Welcome to week 9. What I want to do this week is very similar to last week, with a video with a description of today's subject and an exercise at the end, but you'll also notice this video is slightly improved because there's a big red number in the top left. So I'll try to remember to announce the arrival of the next slide as I go along. Okay, so what we're talking about this week is podcasts, or in my generation, we used to call it the radio. And really what we're talking about is not so much music radio, because we do that in the music section of this module, but we're here talking about the spoken word. So not music, so it's the spoken word. And in the old days, my generation, we used to listen to things like BBC Radio 4 and the World Service, because they have very stimulating, intelligent, amusing, entertaining programs that involve discussions between people, or interviews, or debates, or whatever they might be. So we used to call it radio. So you got the traditional radio programs, and these days you've got loads and loads of podcasts. You probably know this, right? I'm sure some of you listen to podcasts already, and you can find them on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and so on. There are literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of choices out there. So that's good. And the one that I strongly recommend, again showing my generation, is BBC Sounds, which has an enormous choice, very well organised, 101 different subjects from 1,001 different people, and you can go along there and take your choice. Now, what we're going to do today is, or you're going to do, is a writing exercise. So I'll give you prior warning. It's a 400-word review of a podcast, and I will actually allocate the podcast just like if I was an editor of a publication. So as always, when we do something new, what you need to do is to read some examples of good podcasts that have been published already. Now, the one I've brought up here, excuse me, the one I've brought up here comes from the New Statesman. That's the magazine that some of you did a review of a few weeks ago. So you'll be familiar with its style and its readership. Really, really important. As you know, with the New Statesman, it's quite an educated readership. It's sort of university lecturers read it. So that's the demographic they're aiming at. So the language is quite sophisticated, maybe even complex at times. So just bear that in mind when you're reading it. It's not the same readership that you're writing for, because as you know, you're writing for 18 to 22-year-old students. The other example that I have on Moodle comes from all the way across the other side of the world, in Los Angeles. So this is from the Los Angeles Review of Books. It's totally different. Well, in some ways it's quite similar, I guess. It's quite a highbrow audience, similar to the New Statesman. But the one I've chosen there is the Rebel Eaters Club, which is a podcast that was published in March, earlier in March. Have a listen to the podcast and read the review and see how they do it. Again, you'll notice a difference in language. American journalism, particularly sort of highbrow journalism, is a subtly different type of writing style to British journalism of the same nature. So let me give you, so you need to read those two examples, and go and find some more as well if you want more evidence of how the professionals do it. Like I said, there are plenty of podcasts out there. So some writing hints. Now, the most important thing to remember about podcasts is that obviously there are no images. So in some ways, the reviews are quite similar to TV or Netflix or Amazon Prime or YouTube, but there's nothing visual. So you have to create images with your words, and you'll notice that the description of how the professionals do it, how they describe, is actually quite skillful. You also need to use your imagination a bit more with audio than visual. Like I said, you have to kind of conjure up the images in people's minds. A few more things to remember. Make sure that when you're sitting there listening to the podcast, obviously you've got your notepad and your pen with you, and you're actually making notes. And of course you can pause it if it gets too quick for you, and you can replay it and all that sort of stuff. But it's really important that you mention who presented the program, who are the people speaking, and also try and give it kind of what I call the big picture. What did you learn? What was it fascinating? What was the overall verdict on it? And one way to do that is to try and pick what stands out. So don't try and do a transcript. He said that, she said that, that sort of thing. We're trying to get a sense of what the whole thing is about. By all means, you can choose some dialogues, a phrase or a piece of information and quote it, but don't turn it into a he said, she said. So there's a few specific hints for podcast writing. But as always, there's general guidance as well, which you'll be used to because we've been doing this for the past however many weeks. The first thing, and this applies to TV and it applies to books and it applies to even to barely edible food reviews in week 2, you need to assume that your reader hasn't got a clue what this thing's about. So you do need to give some background. So say, for example, what type of program it is. Is it a discussion about history? Is it two rock stars comparing their crazy lifestyles? Give us a very, very short summation of what the program actually is. So, excuse me. Second point, don't forget, if it's a serious subject, don't try and introduce humour into it. It is possible, but it can also be really, really bad taste. So just be careful about that. So if it is a upbeat and happy program, then write about it in an appropriate way. As I mentioned before, don't over describe. Don't say don't talk us through it almost like a script. Don't do that. He said this and she said that, and then they explored this. You need to leave plenty of room for evaluation. As always, use a variety of evaluative techniques. So use similes, adjectives, your own responses to the impression that the podcast made on you. Point number 5, as always, don't forget you only have 400 words. So you need to really get to the point. So make sure you try and strip out all those superfluous phrases. You need to condense this quite dramatically. And yes, a student said to me the other week about a 400-word review, and she had that sort of look on her face. She said, "Wow, it's really difficult." It is really difficult, and I always say that 4,000 words is easier to write than 400. But this is what we're doing. We're trying to practice and get feedback and improve our succinct and precise phrasing. If it's a drama, probably won't be a drama, a podcast, but it might be. Make sure you discuss the characters and mention the actors and talk about the plot, etc. Point number 7, with the structure, and this applies to every type of review, probably every piece of journalism that you do, certainly features, make sure it has a gripping introduction. You need to really grab the reader in the first few words, otherwise he or she is going to read something else. And make sure you tie it up with a very powerful, compelling final paragraph. And finally, last but not least, make sure you spend at least 20 minutes reading, rereading, editing, and improving your article. Check the spelling, check the punctuation, underlined punctuation. Some people are still struggling with that. And make sure you take out all those phrases that you don't really need. Make sure every word should count. And of course, present it professionally. Again, I've provided a template which is on Moodle. All you need to do is download it, overwrite my words, and present it in a professional way. And then finally, when you've done all that, you can submit. Okay, moving swiftly on to slide number 8 and this week's exciting exercise. Now, this is based on a series of podcasts which I stumbled upon a few years ago. They were actually published in 2015, but they're still available online. And like the other items on this presentation, the hyperlink will be on Moodle. So what these 18 podcasts do is each one asks a question which people rarely ask, basically. And they look at things that we kind of take for granted and they investigate them. They look at the psychology, the history, the background, they speak to experts and all that sort of stuff. And they cover a wide range of subjects. The first one, for example, top left, why do we wear ties? It's a question that I've never heard asked before, but it's a fair question because a lot of people do wear ties. The second line down in the middle, high heels, what's all that about? It's something that people take for granted, that women often wear high heels, but I've never heard a discussion about why that might be. And again, that one is covered by experts, and they look at the history and so on. So in total, there's 18 of these, and I'll show you the allocation in a moment. But what you need to do when you are allocated your podcast, obviously click on the appropriate link, listen to the podcast, and make notes with paper and pen, or on a laptop or an iPad, whichever you prefer. Follow the hints that I've just given you in the previous slides, and then go through that process of writing, editing, proofreading, and submitting. Now, before I move on to the allocation, let me just say what I'm doing here, as I've mentioned before, is that when you go and work in the media, it might come as a bit of a shock to you, but generally speaking, the editor will tell you what you're doing. It won't be a question of, you choose one. And as I've said before, in my own career, I can count on the fingers of one hand how many times I was actually allowed to do what I wanted to, which is a bit restrictive, but you get used to it, and it can actually broaden your mind and actually improve your knowledge of things that you wouldn't normally look at. So moving swiftly on to the allocation, what I've done, I've put the 18 podcasts on one slide, and then you'll see names attached to those podcasts. Now, I apologize in advance if you roll your eyes when you see what you've been allocated, but please, I encourage you to take it professionally and give it your best shot. And I must say, hand on heart, this was done completely randomly. I got a list of the students and I just allocated them as they popped up on the screen. So in particular, Nathan, you may not fancy your subject. I don't know, maybe you will, but female body hair. That's your allocation, Nathan. I know that maybe not necessarily appropriate for you personally, but give it your best shot. Have a listen and tell us what that's all about. And as you can see, everybody else, you've got your own particular program that you need to, the podcast that you need to listen to and write a review. Okay. And as I said, the hyperlink is on Moodle, so you can track down your podcast and listen to it. Just a quick recap, 3 golden rules, as always, for writing reviews. You need to describe and evaluate. Make sure you have plenty of space and time for both. And more than anything else, make sure that you're writing for your audience. So it needs to be relevant in terms of language and in terms of how you conceptualize things for the readers of the student magazine, who are generally 18 to 22 years old. And as always, there is a template on Moodle. You can download that and present it in a very professional way. And can I just say here, folks, some of the work I'm still receiving, people put their name on it, but they don't put their last name. I've never seen that in a publication where a journalist just has their first name. Let's be professional. So let's have your first name, John Smith, and your second name, or whatever it might be. Put the date as well. Call it a podcast review. Tell me the name of the podcast, the name of the program, and also the channel, whether it's on Spotify or BBC Sounds or wherever it might be, and also the link, the precise link that will take the reader to the podcast. And as usual, the structure is pretty consistent with what we've done before. Introduction of 40 words, the main body should be about 320. A 40-word conclusion to tie it all up, and then a verdict in 10 words or so. And then right at the end, you can give it some stars, a maximum of 5, minimum of 0. The document you need, the template, is on Moodle week 9, so click on the link, download it, and then as soon as you've done that, save it as week 9 podcast review, March the 24th. And then obviously you listen to the program, you make your notes, you write your article, you edit it, and then you proofread meticulously. We did an exercise on proofreading a few weeks ago, so you know what we need to do. And then submit the article via email to me. And the deadline for this, as always, is Friday, March the 27th at 5 p.m. So that concludes what you need to do for this week's mission. It's all about podcasts. You've had some guidance, you've seen some examples, you can apply the knowledge and skills learned in previous classes, And if you follow all of this guidance, you will submit and produce a wonderful piece of work. Now, before we end for today, I just want to look forward to assessment number 2, which, as you know, is longer than the ones that you did for assessment 1. This is an 800-word review, so you've got more words to play with. And the deadline is exactly 1 month's time, April the 24th. So you've got loads of time to do this. Loads and loads of time to do it. Now, can I humbly suggest that one thing that you might consider, because you can choose what you want to do. If you read the brief, you can choose what the options are. So you might want to do a film review, for example, but can I humbly suggest that you consider doing a book review? Now, in week 1, I handed round a piece of paper, a form, and listed 10 books, and I asked you to tick which ones you've read and which ones you hadn't. Most of you have read something on the list, typically Animal Farm. I think it was very popular, and Great Gatsby. But the other ones are also exceptional books, and I can say that with great authority because I've read most of them. And they're very, very good books. There's a diverse choice there. We've got male and female authors. We've got authors from all over the world. The oldest book is 1922. The most recent one is 2004, so within your lifetimes. But they're all great stories, and some of them won awards. Some of them have been cited as being exceptional works of all time. So there's some really good quality stuff here. And I would actually say that some of them, the first 2, which I actually remember reading, Animal Farm and Siddhartha, they did change the way that I think about the world and think about life. So they're really, really potent stuff. So let me encourage you, if you don't normally read, think about choosing a book for assessment number 2. And if you don't read very much, I would suggest that you focus on books 1 through 5. They tend to be shorter books and pretty straightforward, but they also have great depth to them as well. So I'd recommend one of those 5 if you're not much of a book reader. But if you do like to read more, try one of the ones at the bottom of the list, 6 through 10. And see if any of those appeal. Now, the way to do it, obviously, and it's a bit of a cheat, I guess, but if you want to know what to choose, read a review on Amazon. Here's the review for Siddhartha, one of my favourite books of all time ever. It's about, 100 words or so? But it just sketches out what the book's about. So if you are tempted to do a book, just choose one from the list and read the reviews, and then decide that is going to be your reading material for the next few weeks or so. So yeah, choose a book. Plenty of choice. Read the reviews first and then choose a book, and away you go. Now, the problem with the challenges that we have at the moment, well, there are lots of problems, but one of the ones related to your studies is that the library is not available as a physical space. But as far as I know, you can still order books online from Amazon or other good bookshops. So what I suggest you do is, when you've chosen your book, go to Amazon or somewhere else and order it. And an option which you might want to consider, which I do because I buy a lot of books, is have a look at the second-hand options. So if you click on the book, you'll notice it will say new and second-hand options. Click on that and it'll bring up a list of what's available second-hand. So here you can buy Animal Farm for about, what's that, £6.83, which will be the best £6.83 you'll ever spend in your life. And sometimes, ironically, the new books are actually cheaper than the second-hand ones. So apologies about that, folks, but you might have to put your hand in your pocket and buy a book rather than getting it from the library. A couple of reminders before we finish. Obviously, yes, you can use the Kindle version or any other ebook of your choice, but obviously not an audio book. I actually want you to go through the process of sitting down and using your eyes to read words and then doing the review from that, rather than somebody reading it to you. Once your book has arrived, and I suggest that you order them as soon as you can, obviously start reading it. And I'll give you more guidance next week on how to do book reviews. So that will be, spoiler alert, that will be the subject of next week's class. book reviews. Okay, so that's me finished for today. As always, if you have any questions, let me know by email. And if you don't have any questions, good luck with your reviews of podcasts. Okay, see you next week.